Hey everyone, Eric Hörst from trainingforclimbing.com with you with a new interview series I'm going to be doing hopefully every few months with Dr. Thomas Cunningham, a friend of mine from down here at the Red River Gorge. He's a great climber, he's a super knowledgeable physician, and between the two of us, we have probably 60 or 70 years of climbing experience. I'm not a doctor, but I am a coach of decades, and so kind of the mix of the two of us, hopefully we can reveal some new nuance for you on topics such as training, nutrition, life hacks, climbing hacks, and mainly with the doctor's input, even things like health optimization and longevity, all things that are of great interest to me, and I bet interest to you as well. And so to get started here, Thomas, you've been climbing for more than 20 years, but also give me a bit of a background on your professional side.
Yeah, so I started climbing when I was 16, like you said, just over about 20 years, 38 now. I did my undergrad in medical school here at the University of Kentucky in Lexington.
Yeah.
So about 1 hour away from the Red River
local
Gorge.
Red River Gorge
Local,
climber, yeah.
Exactly. And then didn't venture too far away. Did my residency in emergency medicine at University of Louisville, which is about 2 hours away. So stayed pretty close to the Red River Gorge. And now I've been practicing emergency medicine for about 15 years. And then over the last 5 years or so, I've really gotten a passion for functional medicine, which is really where we take kind of that medicine 2.0 to 3.0. So generally when I work in the hospital, I'm seeing people for some type of symptom or disease ailment, and we're trying to treat that disease. And then in the functional standpoint, we're trying to actually treat the individual who may not actually be sick, but we're trying to optimize that patient.
Right. Yeah, and I'll tell you, this whole concept of functional health is just something that kind of became apparent, or I guess I understood the value of in recent years, maybe as an aging athlete, but also, with podcasts out there like Huberman and Peter Attia and people like that. There's a lot of talk on optimizing the health and the performance and hopefully increasing the lifespan and health span of individuals. That isn't focused on sick patients. Those are the people that come to the hospital, right? Sick and broken and need a doctor to treat them. But how about taking an otherwise healthy individual and helping them perform better? And so that kind of sounds like the stuff a coach does, but you're using a different approach. You're looking under the hood with blood work and glucose monitors and other tools, I imagine, to help
definitely
optimize.
We look at all those things. Sometimes we'll bring in a genetic piece to that as well. So there's countless companies out there that are doing genetic testing and looking at these single nucleotide polymorphisms and how they affect your genes and expression of those genes, which could or make or break sometimes a climbing athlete for sure, or could change some of those nuanced training tips that we're giving them. I would say yes, we have gone from the treating the disease to then a little bit of preventative medicine, but now especially with the advent of some of these podcasts and the internet, there's plenty of people out there doing their own research and realizing, wow, if I can prevent things now, if I can do things now when I'm younger and I am healthier, I'm going to reap those rewards in my 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond.
And so this is of great interest to me because I'm someone who's spent my entire adult life, studying climbing performance and the research that's available in climbing and in other sports, trying to apply that research to climbing and developing training protocols and trying to dial in nutrition and recovery techniques. But there's kind of a whole other world there that I'm recognizing that's available by, engaging someone like yourself. So my goal today isn't to drill down that rabbit hole. I'm going to leave that for future podcasts. But today, let's kind of get the ball rolling, more reflecting on our personal experiences as climbers and specifically as aging climbers. Now, Thomas is a young man compared to me. I have just turned 60, and I'm still passionate as ever about climbing, and hopefully I don't look or act or climb like I'm 60, I hope.
I would say.
So I guess it's a good time to not act my age, right? Thomas is 38, but also, changes begin to occur in your 30s and 40s that can adversely affect your adaptation to training and your ability to recover and perform your best. And so that's kind of what we're going to look at today, kind of in a few parts, some training tips for aging climbers. And when I say aging climbers, let's say anybody over 35 or 40, because that's when you start to feel, many athletes start to feel the changes. And then we'll talk a bit about training hacks, especially from the perspective of a weekend warrior, because Thomas and I are both lifelong weekend warriors. We're not pro climbers who, it's our job. It's still kind of our hobby to climb. And then maybe if we have some time, we'll talk a bit about some nutritional concepts or hacks or changes perhaps that we could all make to improve better, and wrap things up with some things we wish we knew when we were younger. And I have a long list of those that could fill a whole podcast, but we'll give you just a few of those here today. So let's circle back and start off with tips for over 40 climbers. And so maybe we can start off with you, Thomas. How are you training or maybe behaving a bit differently at age 38 compared to when you were 28 or 20
yes.
as a youngster here at the Red River Gorge?
Number one would be where I'm spending my time and volume in that training, and how intentional I am with those workouts. So, you've alluded to this many times, that we can get away with some of that garbage mileage when we're younger. Yeah. We can be a little bit less focused. We can be a little less direct when we're younger. And the biggest, I would say, thing that I've attacked now is being very having lots of foresight into my training and trying to tackle one energy system, as you would put it, per workout, and trying to get those workouts high quality, and to make sure that all of that time is being spent focusing on that task at hand. Diving a little bit deeper, it's very hard for me at my age to keep that strength and power up. I'm sure you're the same way. And so making sure that those workouts specifically are very quality. And then, if I'm going to have anywhere where I'm skimping, I'm actually probably going to be pulling back from some of the more aerobic or volume-based workouts, because I have a large training volume behind me, and I feel like I can pull back a little bit on those.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. And, I reflect back on my younger days, and I see my sons and other younger climbers, and, you go to the gym and there's a strong social component to what's going on there.
Yes.
And to some degree, the training occurs as a group gathered around, say, a kilter board or a system wall or the lead wall or the boulders. And so you're kind of training as other people do or with other people. And that can be great fun, but it's not necessarily the most effective way. And so when you're young and have a lot of time in your hand to hang around in the gym and maybe take more of a shotgun approach to training, doing a lot of everything, a young body can maybe get away with that. And again, if there's a lot of downtime socializing, maybe 4 hours at the gym can be an okay session. But for me, if I tried to spend 4 hours training, I would break myself.
Yeah.
And so as you get older, I think it's important to be more intentional, as you mentioned, having a goal in mind with every workout. Is your goal strength and power? If so, then warm up and get to work hangboarding or campus boarding or doing some limit bouldering. But to mix that with route climbing or some other, tangential forms of training might get too voluminous and potentially even not be as productive in terms of signaling, in terms of the adaptations that occur. And, so more and more, I'm a huge fan of very targeted training. For me, in recent years, I break my workouts into two. Rather than doing a 2 or 3 hour session, I do 2 1-hour sessions. It might be a hangboard workout in the morning. It might be a tread wall session in the evening. And I find that is way more productive, getting that long rest and a meal in between the two workouts than trying to do it all at once. Yeah. And, it requires some scheduling and some planning, but I think people should, as they become more advanced in their training, be more intentional, more targeted, and certainly more nuanced, trying to match what they're training to what they really need versus investing a lot of time into things that aren't going to gain them much of anything.
Now, I think that's an interesting point, that instead of putting all the volume in one session, that as an aging athlete, when I think of two-a-days, I think of high school football and soccer, and just these brutal sessions.
The goal is to destroy.
Yeah, the goal is to destroy. Well, whereas you're doing it a little bit more eloquently, right? You are separating out those sessions so that 2 hours of training or volume for the day is higher quality than it would be if you put it together. Yeah. Now, are you doing the same energy system both times ever, or is it always two different energy
Always
systems?
two different.
Always two.
Right. So if the morning is strength and power, that's very alactic focused. Then the evening workout could be power endurance, but more often I'm mainly a route climber. I'd rather do an endurance session in the evening that is not exhaustive. It's not overly pumpy. It really fully recruits the slow twitch fibers, the oxidative fast twitch fibers. It gives the mitochondria a workout, those factories that make ATP get a workout, but it's not hard on the nervous system. The morning workout was,
yes,
but the evening workout's not. So it's like you're, doing two fairly different sessions that in terms of, I think even down on the, gene level, is causing different types of expression.
Yeah, definitely different neurosignaling, different neural pathways, but you're separating them by 6 to 8 hours. Is what I'm hearing, just to kind of get that.
6 or 8 hours. And some people might separate them by days. Maybe you do strength and power on a Tuesday and you do more of an endurance workout on Wednesday. And I've done it that way, and sometimes I still do it that way. But if I'm really trying to pick up the volume of training that I need as a route climber without exhausting myself, it just makes sense to break it into two workouts. Again, in the older days, I would go, and maybe in a long session, do some weightlifting, do some bouldering, do some route climbing, kind of try to hit it all. But I've come to realize that's not the most effective way to train. Break them up into parts. I'd rather do my weightlifting, which I do just a limited amount of, on a non-climbing day. Because it's like the climbing day is more the agonist, the pulling muscles, and then the weightlifting days are more, pushing muscles or maybe hip extension if I'm doing something like deadlifting, but you're not hitting the muscles in a very climbing specific way. So I don't feel like it gets in the way of my recovery from my climbing workout to do that on a separate day. And that, gets down to the art of scheduling over the course of a week, which could be a whole podcast on its own in terms of how do you go about piecing together a schedule for a 7-day week. I don't think we want to go there necessarily now, but I guess what I'm saying is I've learned as I get older, I need to be more judicious with my energy investment, my time spent training, and not get carried away, which as a younger climber is easy to do. Kind of that more is better mentality that a young athlete can get sucked into.
I think that there's also something to be said about the familiarity of the workouts that you're doing and the holds that you're using. One of the things that I have noticed is if I'm board climbing and I know the specific holds, I'm much less risking injury using holds that I'm aware of. Or if I'm climbing up my home wall, I know how that hold feels. I know what the texture's like. I'm less likely to dry fire. And I've definitely gone away from the typical gym set route in the main, say, part of the gym, so to speak. Especially with some of the newer setting, you're putting your body in very peculiar positions, aggressive drop knees, real bad heel hooks, undercling moves that are just not really conducive to building strength. And I've started to avoid those types of sessions and become much more specific and intentional about my board climbing itself.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, some gyms, I think probably an increasing number of gyms are starting to set some of these World Cup comp boulders that have elements of parkour and swinging and jumping and all this. And I mean, I have nothing against that. It's fantastic to watch. It's very interesting to see that at the competitive level. But for us as outdoor rock climbers, there's really no reason to do that. Right. It's not gonna, I can't think of when I've ever been on a route that I've had to be swinging and jumping like some of those World Cup routes.
Exactly.
And so that's kind of an art form or a sport of its own. And certainly if the viewer of this video is heading into competition, well, then you need to train that type of stuff. But if you're using a gym to train for outdoor climbing, which is what Thomas and I do, you really, your training should be somewhat similar to your outdoor climbing endeavors.
Yeah, I just think that I would be as specific about the training as you can be, especially down to the level of where am I climbing on the weekends? What kind of routes do I like to do? Am I a boulder? Am I a sport climber? Am I a big wall climber? And then try to really gear your training as specific, because I definitely noticed that my fatigue builds easier, my recovery takes longer. And so putting in time or volume that's not going to get me my end goal or my end enjoyment piece is not worth my time.
Yeah. And one thing you mentioned that I just want to comment on before we move on, you talked about injury, and definitely as we get older, our bodies are a little less resilient than in our younger days. You hear of athletes in any sport. It could be the NFL, Aaron Rodgers tearing an Achilles, Christian McCaffrey tearing an ACL. These injuries happen, it seems, disproportionately to the older athletes. Maybe it's just accumulated wear and tear that compromises them. Perhaps it's slower recovery. I mean, there could be a number of things going on, but I've always felt, I guess, dating back to around when I turned 40, I realized that an injury that takes me out of the game is a time lost that I can't get back. When you're a 20-something climber, your climbing future seems almost infinite. So many days ahead of you. And so if you lose a month or a season to injury, it's a bummer, but it's not a massive loss. But when you're a 40, 50, 60-year-old climber, you lose a month or a season to injury.
That's a big deal.
It's a big loss, and it's time you're never getting back. And so kind of my final point on this before we move on is, I've joked that rule number one of Eric's train club, especially for older athletes, is don't get injured.
Yes.
So that means not doing exercises that tempt injury. Avoiding party tricks. You're at a social event and you want to show off your one-arm pull-up, and you can do one, but you're not warmed up. You probably shouldn't do it.
Right.
And or just giving a boulder or a route an umpteenth go of the day when you're in such a high state of fatigue, that bad things can happen.
Yeah, leave the pride at the door.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think that's prudence that many people have to learn the hard way, probably myself as well, because I've had my share of climbing injuries over the years. But as I get older, I'm becoming more self-aware of just even a move on a climb or a boulder that feels like it could be injurious. I'll just say, I'll just step off the wall or
away.
Find a different route. I don't need to punch through it and take that risk as maybe I would have 20 years ago. So I guess that speaks to prudence or wisdom that comes with age. But let's move on to the next topic, which is training and, importantly, time hacks. Both you and I come from really a climbing life of being weekend warriors, never being pro climbers that were on endless road trips or just climbed for a living. We've been in school or had jobs, me at a university, you at a hospital, and I'm now employed as CEO of PhysiVantage Nutrition. You're beginning a functional medicine practice. You have 3 kids at home. I did have 2 kids at home. They're now grown adults, so a lot of moving parts to dovetail together. And so being effective in your training and your time and your planning for climbing trips, outings, weekends, whatnot, is quite important. So maybe you can share a couple of your hacks that you've discovered or employed to be effective, and then I will do the same.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, between job, career, hospital, being on call, wife, 3 kids, all mine are young, yours are a little bit older now. One of the biggest things I would say would be route selection. And so making sure that you're using your time wisely, meaning that, at least for me, when I'm coming down from Louisville, it's going to be a big deal if I select a route that may be an hour or 2 hour hike away from the vehicle. would be a big thing for me. And so
that would not be a good thing.
That would not be a good thing. Yeah, correct. So picking a crag where it's easy to find partners, it's easy to get to. It may save me an hour hike there and back, may get me an extra 1 or 2 goes. So if I'm getting out maybe 5, 6, 7 times in the season, that could be the difference between twice as many goes on the project for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. But then again, you're at those crags that are easy to hike into are also the busiest crags.
Right. So then picking your days, right? So I usually will try to get out during the week itself, which is, I might get 1 day out during the week, but I try to make that not a weekend day. So that's kind of my hack would be, if you have the ability to not go on a weekend, that would be.
I think a lot of people can relate to that, because if you're in, say Salt Lake City or Denver, on the weekends, the crags are flooded with climbers. And so to go to the easy to access or super popular crags, you can wait in a queue a long time to get on your projects. And, by the time you get warmed up and it's your turn in the queue, like the day could be shot or half shot. And that doesn't work if you have a 4-hour round trip drive and, a very limited climbing day. You got to make it count. So weekday climbing is a good one. And selecting your crags, and I guess being optimal in how many goes you give the route too. Yeah,
and I would say I would try to work in that day during the week, and I may be trying to train the next day or the following day. So I would never be giving my route, that 3rd, 4th, 5th go where I'm just beating myself into submission, especially as at my age now, I can't do that anymore. So I may give it 2, maybe 3 goes, and then I'm heading back, try to make it home for dinner.
Yeah. Well, kind of along the same lines, I've never been in a position where I could do day trips to a world-class area like the Red. I've, living in Pennsylvania, have to drive 6 hours to the New River Gorge or 9 hours to the Red River Gorge. So for me, it was important to, first of all, look at a weather forecast when I'm planning my weekend ventures. You don't want to invest all that time and gas money into driving down and being in the rain. There's some overhanging crags you can climb at, but it's just not ideal. It's not enjoyable, and you're not going to likely climb your hardest in poor conditions like that. So for me, a good weather forecast, which is something I know something about, was a big part of my planning as a weekend warrior, all these years. And so that was kind of the first step. And then I guess when it comes to training hacks and efficiency in training, the big breakthrough for me was about the time my wife and I started our family. 2 small kids born within 2 years of each other, building a home wall so that I could train at home and not have to go to a health club to lift weights or go to a climbing gym an hour away. A lot of days I would come home from my university job at 3 or 4 p.m. and my wife, we'd pass at the front door and she would go out to her evening job and, not get home till 8 or 9 at night. And so when I arrived home, I was Mr. Mom, making dinner for the kids. And so I needed a way to get a workout in those situations. And so building at first just a very modest woody that I could boulder on was a breakthrough. Adding a few hangboards over decades, it turned into more than a few hangboards, eventually some free weights and a tread wall. And so over the course of 20 years, built out a pretty extensive home gym that was great for me to train in a very efficient way, but also to be able to spend time with my kids. When they were small kids, they would be crawling around on the carpeted floor in the climbing gym, and a safe setting, I could watch them and they could play around on the holds. And then age 5 or 6, they started climbing on the holds. And of course, by age 10 or 12, they were climbing harder than me, and the rest is history. So it, in hindsight, was a blessing that I had the space in my house to build. We had an unfinished basement in the house we moved into when we had kids. And so that unfinished basement, I guess I had an idea that it could turn into something cool, and it did. And it was very, very helpful for me that, today, my wife and I are empty nesters, and, my wife and I still use that gym basically every single day. Yeah. Not for the same thing. One day it might be weightlifting, the next day it might be climbing, but I'm thankful we have it. So it was a good investment to make over all of those years, slowly but surely building out this comprehensive gym. And something tells me you at least have a home wall at your house.
I do. I do have a home wall. I put mine in just before COVID, which was brilliant timing.
Good move, yeah.
But I would be remiss if I thought I could work a full-time job and then drive 30, 40 minutes to a gym both ways, get up and do, a morning workout before work and try to make it there and do the workout. And we know consistency is key. And so anything that you can do to maximize your time at home and also maximize your time in the gym or training is definitely a win. So for me to get up before work and be able to get down to the basement and get a workout in, or come home after work and do it with my children and have that quality time while also doing a nice workout on a home wall is amazing. And I would say it's so easy now. There's so many companies that build these easy installs. Just having at least a hangboard, I would say, would be a must. It's a very
$100 to put in a beast maker in your house. So I mean, that would be the first step. And then maybe a few dumbbells would be a good investment. And then at some point a woody of some kind. I know people that just live in apartments that they rent, and they will build a freestanding woody, and hey, it's something. It's something they can get on and do climbing moves and engage their hands and their feet and their core. And so that's a step in the right direction. And maybe you're lucky that you have a gym right in your neighborhood, but many people don't. They might have to, in a metropolitan area, deal with 30 or 40 minutes of traffic to get to a climbing gym. And maybe that's doable a couple days a week, perhaps on the weekends, but for a lot of people, that's not doable on a consistent basis. And I'll tell you, Thomas, for me as a 60-year-old climber, maybe the most important hack of all, it's not so much a hack, I guess, but it's just an approach, is that I have found I need to do something physical every single day.
Something.
Like, days off are not a good thing. And that's might not sound like good coaching advice, because athletes of all kinds need rest days. But what I'm saying is, as an aging athlete, your body is just trying to shut down. I mean, we're genetically programmed to, you hit your 50s and 60s. 100 years ago, the average life expectancy was 50. 100 years ago. So people my age were mostly dead. 7 days a week, I do something. At the very least, I'm going out for a walk for 20, 30 minutes, or a run. More commonly, 3 or 4 days a week, I do some climbing exercises. 1 or 2 days a week, I lift some weights. And then 1 to 3 days a week, I do some running. But every day I do one of those, and it's what works best for me as an older climber, just to kind of keep it together. A younger person training super hard, maybe they need, a day off here or there.
Sure.
Certainly from climbing and finger intensive training, they do.
So you're not going hard every day, right? It's
not going hard every day.
Something,
right?
Even if it's a walk or you put a pack on.
Yeah. In fact, and give me your opinion on this. That might be one big training mistake of climbers and maybe athletes in general, is too many high intensity days. Because that is what's really hard on the body in terms of the nervous system, even in terms of injury, is those high intensity days. Too many of them in a short period of time is often counterproductive.
100%.
So that's a good point. Yeah, out of that 7-day period, probably half of the sessions, maybe more, are aerobic oriented. Whether it's climbing specific aerobic or generalized aerobic. And then the strength and the power or the high intensity anaerobic endurance work is limited to just 2 or 3 days a week.
Agreed. I'm doing probably 2 days at the most at this time. But I would say that, like we had said earlier, because I feel like it's harder for me to make gains in those I'm really prioritizing those to make sure that I am fresh. Right, like if you want to make gains in power or strength, you have to be fresh. You have
to be fresh.
You can't go into a
less is more.
Less is more. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're leaving that one rep in the bag. You're calling it quits before the end.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, so let's move forward here and let's tap into some of your perhaps medical expertise, and the topic being shifts in training and health and nutrition in recent years, like things that we've, through research and perhaps some of these popular ideas expressed on podcasts. It could be fasting, it could be cold plunging. I mean, I think some of this stuff is almost getting overboard, some of the craziness, that I'm kind of becoming a back to basics person. But in any case, maybe touch on a few things.
I would agree. I think that there is, there's a dime a dozen hack for one thing or another that's the certain vogue at certain points, and I would say that we definitely have seen that things can go very esoteric one way, and then we're all kind of coming all around back to the beginning, which is consistency is key, managing your volume, making sure you're not doing too many things high intensity, with too much volume at the same time. But one thing I think is that we have learned is protein amount and protein timing. Yeah. I think that is a big one. Is that I think?
So let's drill into that a little bit. Can you give me some numbers?
Yeah, I think that.
Your opinion?
Yeah, I think that we've realized that the amount of protein that is sufficient versus what's optimal has probably gone up. Right now, I would say that there's pretty good evidence and pretty good uniformed opinion that we want somewhere around, I would say, the 1 gram per pound of body weight, or maybe 2 grams per kilogram, for an athlete, right? It's not just,
which is a lot of protein. It's a lot of protein.
It is a lot of protein.
But for a strength oriented athlete, I think there's some pretty good evidence that those are the kind of numbers you want to be in that ballpark.
And there's so many different options to get that protein, some ways easier than others. The other aspect, I think, is protein timing. So I think, maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was a big thought that you only have this anabolic window within 20, 30 minutes, maybe an hour max after the workout. And now we've realized that no, you actually have some increased muscle protein synthesis and anabolic power a little bit longer. So you don't have to be like shaking your protein shake right out the gym door kind of deal. You do have a little bit of time to do that. In fact, if you were to get a workout in, your next couple meals will still have a little bit of an increased muscle protein synthesis.
Yeah.
So that would be the one big thing, is that,
and probably a good dose of protein before you go to bed at night, because if you're sleeping 6 or 8 hours, that's a fast.
It is,
and you're doing a lot of rebuilding during that time. So a bedtime protein shake would seem like a good idea.
It is, and I think that there's definitely a subset of individuals that are going to be, say, would promote fasting. And I would say one thing that I have, tried to go both ways on is there benefits to fasting? Yes. Is there also detriments, which is, am I losing protein? Am I losing lean muscle mass? So for the aging athlete, I think that it is much more important to hold on to lean muscle mass and to get the adequate amount of protein however you can, rather than promoting, say, like the fasting. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do a 3-day water fast or a prolonged fast once a year, once a quarter, but I think that if you're someone that is sacrificing protein intake for some type of feeding window, I would really be looking at that.
I'll tell you, I tried, 6-8 years ago to do some fasting, and I found it was counterproductive in terms of affecting my recovery to not consume protein all morning, to fast until mid-afternoon. My energy levels were down. I felt like my recovery was down. It was just very counterproductive for me. And but yet I listen to these podcasts with these longevity experts, and they're like, well, fasting is great. If we starve the mice, they live longer. And then it dawned on me that what is good for longevity isn't necessarily good for performance. And so fasting might improve your lifespan, but is it going to improve your performance? And for me, the answer was no. I needed more protein. I needed some carbohydrates to fuel my workouts. And so fasting is a no-go for me, at least at this stage of the game.
Yeah, I think this is a complex subject, and I think the jury's still out, right? There's so many moving pieces. I think there is good in vitro and mice studies that do show fasting and decreased mTOR response and decreased muscle protein synthesis does add to longevity, but then at the expense of lean muscle mass.
Right.
So, but I don't think the reverse is true, right? We definitely know that individuals in their later years that have less lean muscle mass have a higher mortality. They're more likely for falls, they're going to break a hip, they're increased risk for Alzheimer's, and so...
And it affects your metabolism, right?
Not
muscle...
Exactly, not to mention quality
of life. Or glucose disposal.
Right, so if you were telling me that, my quality of life is going to be poor in my last decade of life, but I may live those extra 10 years, there's definitely a give and take. So it's not a black or white picture. In my personal view, I think that the current state, I would probably lean towards having more lean muscle mass and making sure my protein is adequate, especially for someone that's an active climber, that's an aging athlete.
Right. So don't be scared away from a high protein diet. That's not to say you need to go carnivore. You can still have a very balanced diet, but just make sure you're getting enough protein. The 1 gram per pound of body weight is a good target. Now, that's hard to do from just food alone.
It can be, yes.
because you would have to eat a lot of food and potentially a lot of calories to get there. And so like in my case, the only way I can get, let's say 140 or 50 grams of protein in a day is a few servings of protein powder, like whey protein, collagen protein, in addition to my food. And so half of my protein comes from whole food and half is supplemental protein. Typically I'll do collagen protein before I train, before I load my tendons, my fingers, my joints. And then my post-workout or bedtime protein feeding is a whey protein shake. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely possible if someone wanted to try to do it just with diet. I think that there's definitely a way to do that.
Just with whole foods?
Just with whole foods, yes. I would say, I am someone that doesn't always have that luxury, and...
you would need to consume a lot of meat to get there. You're not going to do it from plants and beans.
I think...
You're not going to get to 150 grams. You'd have to eat pounds and pounds and pounds.
I think just from the caloric density of the food...
You would spend a lot of time in the toilet.
You might spend a lot of time on the toilet. But yeah, I do. I probably consume 1 or 2 shakes a day of whey protein, collagen protein.
And you must consume some animal-based proteins in terms of eggs, milk, chicken, fish, things like that.
I do.
On a daily basis.
I'm a non-discriminatory eater. I try to source my meats and my animal products as best I can, and I try to have as plenty of fruits and vegetables, but usually an animal product at dinner time. And then shakes and fruits, veggies, and carbs during the day.
Right. Okay, so let's move on to the final part of our conversation here today, and that is things we wish we knew earlier. So maybe what we've learned in my case, old age, in your case, middle age, that makes you more efficient and effective, that you wish that the 20-year-old version of yourself knew?
Sure. I would say maybe climb more for fun would be a big one. For me, I think, at least for my personality, I'm very consumed by the try hard, and I think maybe to a detriment. And I've pushed myself down a training hole or a recovery hole many a times that has, I think, gotten me in trouble. And sometimes that has led to injury. And those have been really tough times dealing with an injury where you can't do the thing that you do love.
Right.
And then it's almost like kind of a wake-up call, so to speak, on the flip side. That would probably be the one thing. And then maybe to add to that, something that I think I know now and that we have a good body of research for is that an injury isn't the end of the world. And in fact, most climbers that have a finger injury come back the same or stronger. And so I think that when I did have those injuries maybe 10, 15 years ago, there really wasn't a good body of evidence, and I scoured looking for some type of reassurance that the thing I loved to do wasn't over. And I mean, I can say from personal experience, I've had several full-on pulley ruptures, many finger tweaks, and year over year, I've continued to get a little bit better, So I would say if there is someone that has that injury or is undergoing that injury, the chances are you're going to be fine.
I mean, climbing's hard on the body. If you climb long enough and hard enough, you're going to experience one or more climbing injuries. And so if you climb for more than 2 decades or more than 4 decades, we've had our share of injuries, but all of them we've risen from and climbed better after. I guess maybe the one thing I wish I knew when I was younger on that front is to kind of heed those initial pangs or pains or sensations of a developing injury, because they're not all acute injuries that just happen like that. I mean, sometimes they are, but a lot of them come on more slowly. And as a younger climber, I think I was more prone, I think many climbers are prone just to climb through the developing pain and hope that it goes away. Or ignore it, stick their head in the sand. And now I've learned in my older age, and I wish I had learned this younger, that you should, pay attention to those early signals or signs of a developing injury, muscle imbalance, whatever it is, finger, elbow, shoulder, and ask yourself, what can I do to correct it? Or find somebody who can help you out, a PT, or see a physician to get to the bottom of the issue sooner rather than later when perhaps it
too late
takes you out of the sport for a while, or even in worst case requires surgery.
I think that's definitely good advice. I think there are always some warning signs or some naggles, or maybe I would say one of the things that I wish I knew is you get into this training mindset where you put the blinders on and you're starting to dig yourself a recovery hole. And so having the 30,000 foot view to realize I'm getting worse because I'm not taking my recovery game seriously, not that I'm not training enough.
Yeah.
Rarely are your poor gains because you're not training enough, right? That's kind of the lesson I wish I would have known, is that I constantly would have bad performance after bad performance, and I would think, wow, I need to double down, when in fact I needed to sleep more, I needed to eat more, I needed to look at those allostatic factors. Was it all of the exams that I had just done, or all of the studying plus the training plus the lack of sleep plus all of the burning the candle at both ends?
Yeah, that's a good point. And kind of along those same lines is, and this is a mistake I definitely made for many, many years, is thinking that time spent doing specific training, whether it was finger training or running or weightlifting, was more important than actual climbing time. And I couldn't have been more wrong about that. And I don't care whether you're a beginner or a 20-year-old veteran, climbing is still a skill sport. You need to climb a lot. Yeah. And so if you're hangboarding 3 days a week and climbing 1 day a week, I think it would be better to flip that around and climb 3 days a week and hangboard 1 day a week, or whatever the case is. The goal should be, as a participant in a skill sport, a very skill sport. This is not sprinting. This is not weightlifting, where it is mostly physical. What we do is mostly mental and technical. Yeah. And lifting weights and hangboarding doesn't help you there. What helps you there is going climbing. And so whether it's in a gym, on boulders, at the crag, climb not as much as possible, because 7 days a week of climbing would be too much. But climbing 3 or 4 days a week for many, many years is the pathway to mastery. And yes, you do need to do some supplemental strength training, but a lot of people, including myself, had it flipped around. And a lot of my younger years, I thought I could make up for lack of climbing time with strength training. And what ended up happening is I got to the cliff and was strong, but I didn't perform my best, or didn't maybe climb as hard as I could have in those days, because my footwork was still problematic, or I hadn't really learned certain techniques or things that I needed to do, or developed the mental skills. And again, that only comes through days at the crag. So again, the older Eric realizes the importance of developing climbing skill, and hopefully all the listeners here can take that to heart and look at their schedule and say, how can I fit in 100 climbing days a year? I think that should be the bare minimum for someone who's serious about climbing.
Yeah, and like you said, that doesn't necessarily have to be on the rock. That could be in the gym. That could be on the home wall.
Could be on the home woody, exactly.
Right? But it's movement. It's pulling climbing moves. We're not just hanging off one hand.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about your climbing wisdom that has grown over the years?
Yeah, I feel like my recovery game is much better. Yeah. And so I think that it allows me to maybe eke out better gains with a single workout, because I'm maximizing all of the things, whether that's my nutrition, my protein intake, my sleep, just getting enough sleep and making sure that next day workout is as fueled as it can be.
And if you're at the crag all day, proper fueling and eating at the crag. I was someone who, for many years, again, as a younger person, I'd take water to the cliff and that was it. I would basically go 8 hours of climbing and not eat. And it made no sense whatsoever. So now it's so easy to throw a good, a few protein bars or a piece of fruit, or make even a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, for goodness sakes, is not a bad climbing meal to take with you to the crag. So I think, getting smarter about food, getting smarter about warming up. There's so many, subtle things that play a pretty powerful role in how we perform and how we recover and how we adapt to training.
Yeah, warm up is a good one for me as well. Early on, it was you got to the cliff and you just tied on and you started climbing right out the gate. It may be easier, but there was no, dynamic stretching. There was no, increased interval warm up. I wasn't doing any, kind of these pre-excitation pulls. I wasn't doing any core warm up. I wasn't doing any big mobility warm up or aerobic warm up. And I think that's something that I may spend, 30 or 40 minutes prior to even getting on the rock, just trying to get everything activated to prevent injury.
Yeah, especially for older climbers, for sure. There's less leeway to shortcut the warm up. And I guess one more thing I wanted to throw out there, because I think it's just so powerful, and the older version of myself realizes this now, and I try to share it with the younger version of myself, which is my sons, and that is the power that comes with discipline and sacrifice. And the more I spend time with the best climbers in the world, we have one of them living here in this house right now with me for the past month, it just blows my mind to see the level of discipline and sacrifice that individual makes. And we're talking in a lot of areas, certainly with regard to diet and food, extreme discipline in eating a very healthful diet and avoiding consuming virtually zero alcohol or sugar or refined foods, that maybe for the average person wouldn't be counterproductive, but for someone trying to climb their hardest is counterproductive. There's no amount of alcohol that makes you climb better.
Right.
Can you confirm that, Dr.
I can confirm
Cunningham?
Yes, I think that's an easy one.
And you could probably say it about refined sugar as well, and refined foods. While small doses probably aren't problematic, trying to avoid those things and sacrifice in that regard, desserts and fatty foods and alcohol and partying and late nights, those are things that as a younger climber are probably all around you, and let's put it this way, the training and the time you spend climbing is putting your foot on the accelerator to make you a better, stronger climber. But then what are the things that are putting the foot on the brake pedal at the same time? That's not a very effective way to drive. One foot on the accelerator, one on the brake. Get the foot off the brake. And so you get the foot off the brake by taking away or removing as many of those counterproductive things that are going to hold you back. And in some ways, perhaps invisibly, which is what the case of consuming a lot of alcohol would do. You might not perceive that it's affecting you, but it would be by compromising your sleep. It's empty calories. It probably is not good for your hydration status and a number of other things. And so I would say, if you're really serious about climbing your best, ask yourself what things in your life are putting the foot on the brake pedal when you really want to have that foot off and be stepping on the gas.
100%. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah. So, well, thank you. Well, hopefully, dear listener, you enjoyed this conversation between Dr. Cunningham and myself. If you did, please leave a comment or some questions below the video here on the YouTube channel, and we can probably get to those next time around.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, Eric.
Yep.